Number one says, if this table represents a function. Okay, so the thing that you need to highlight from this problem is, does it represent a function? This is the first part of the question. And then the second part, and then let's make a note right here that this is the first part. And then the second part is, if you switch the input and output values, do the data represent a function? And then you have to explain. So now they're asking you if you switch the input and output. So let's answer the first question. So what we need to do is look at every single input value and see if the input values will give you a different output. So when we go to 2, you get 5. When you go to 3, you get 6. When you get to 4, it gives you 6. 5 gives you 9, and 8 gives you 11. So that means that 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8 are going to be your inputs, and they're not repeating, so they have one specific output. Now, the next part, they're telling you, what about if you switch it? So for part 2, I want to use the same table, but I want to use a different color so you can see. So if I'm switching these numbers around, then I want to get 5 and 2. Then here we're going to get 6 and 3, 6 and 4, 9 and 5, and lastly 11 and 8. So now if you look, you have 5 is going to 2, which is fine, but when you get to 6, 6 gives you 3, but 6 also gives you 4. So that means that one input of 6 can either go to 3 or to 4, which means that the input has 2 different outputs, which doesn't make it a function. So we have answered question 1 and also question 2. This question is worth 2 points. So make sure that you write right here a +2. Alright, for this problem, we know that a class is volunteering at an animal shelter. But the information that we need, it says each student is responsible for caring for 4 animals during every hour spent on the shelter. Okay, then it says complete the diagram to show how many animals are cared by one student at over various length of time. Now that means that one student in 1 hour is going to take care of 4 animals. Now if he spends another 4 hours there, you need to add those 4, so that's going to give you 4 more animals, which is 8, and then after 3 hours is going to be 4 more animals, and that's going to be 12, and this pattern is going to continue. And then part B mentions, does the diagram represent a function? Yes or no? Keep in mind that these are going to be your input values, and to figure out if it's a function, you need to just connect it to the other side and see if the inputs only have one output. Keep in mind, every single input has one output. In this case, it is a function because the inputs don't repeat and they're going only to one output value. This question is worth 1 point for part A, and then you also have 2 points for part B for having the correct explanation and determining whether it's a function or not. So we're going to put a +1, then we're also going to put a +2. Let's move on to the next part. For this problem, we're going to be comparing 2 functions. We already know that they're functions because right here, they tell you that they're functions. Now, when we're comparing functions, we're looking for two things. We're going to be looking for what we call the initial value which is our b, our letter b, and then we also need our rate of change or our slope. So rate, I'm also going to put slope, and that's going to be our letter m. So we need to compare those two. To find the initial value, let's start with function a. To find the initial value, you're going to look for your y axis, which is going to be the vertical line right here, and it tells you right here that this is your y, and you're going to go to this point. This is where it's actually touching the graph. That's going to be our point 16. So that's going to be your initial value for function a. So b is going to be equal to 16. Now, we also need to find our rate of change, our slope. And to be able to do that, what we're going to do is use the slope formula. So we need to choose 2 points. The best point to choose is this one that we already have, and that's going to give you 0 on the x right here. So it's not moving anywhere, it's just going to stay on 0, and you're going to go up 16, so that's going to be 0, 16. And then the next point, you can choose any point. You can choose this one, but the issue with this one is that it's between these two numbers, so we cannot be too precise. So I'm actually going to go to 4 on the x, and then I'm going to go up right here, just because it is nicely connected by those lines. You could also use 8 and 24. Your answer won't change. So now I'm going to write 4 and 20. And like always, we're going to label our x's and our y. So this is going to be x1, y1, x2, y2. And now we're going to use the slope formula. And if you don't remember, I'm going to write it up here. Slope formula is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, and that's going to give you your m. So using that information, we're going to do 20 minus 16 over 4 minus 0, and that's going to give you 4 over 4, which is going to be equal to 1. So your slope for function a is going to be 1. Now let's look at the slope and the initial value for function b. Whenever we're looking for the initial value of a table, the only thing you need to pay attention is where your input is going to be equal to 0. In this case, my input is 0 right here, and my y value is 10. I want to use a different color, so for this one, our initial value is going to be 10. Again, just because the 0 is right here, and wherever the 0 is for the x, that's where your initial value is going to be. Now, we need to choose 2 points to find the slope and use the slope formula that is written above. So I'm going to choose the first point that is right here because it's usually the easiest one. And for this video, I'm going to use this point right here. So that's going to be 0, 10, and then I'm going to have 6, 22. You could choose any points that you want. I'm just going to choose these two. I'm going to label them x1, y1, then we're going to have x2, y2, and now we're going to put it into the formula. We have 22 minus 10 divided by 6 minus 0, and that's going to give us 12 minus 6 And now we can simplify that, and that's going to give us 2. So our slope for our function b is going to be 2. If we need to compare, we need to see which one is bigger or which one is smaller, and if they have anything that is the same. Now let's look at part A. It says, which function shows a greater rate of change? Explain your reasoning. So the function that has a greater rate of change is going to be the function that has the largest slope. So we're looking for the one with the largest m. So we're going to keep in mind, let's make a note. We need to find out which one has the larger m value. And we have m is equal to 2 for function b, and m is equal to 1 for function a. So everybody should know that 2 is larger than 1, so we're going to say function b has a greater rate of change, or has a larger slope, because 2 is larger than 1. For part b, it says, plot the order pairs from the table in function b onto the graph in function a, and then compare the 2 lines. Explain how your graph confirms your answer to part a. So for this part, we're going to go up again, and now we need to use the information on the table to graph. Okay, so we have our first point is going to be 0, 10, so we're going to go right here at 0, and then we're going to go to 10, which is somewhere right here in the middle. So let's put our first point somewhere here. Now the next point is going to be 2, 14. So we're going to go to 2, and then 14 is going to be somewhere here. So I'm going to put it somewhere here. We're going to continue 4, 4, and then we're going to go 18 right here. And then the next number is 6 and 22, which is going to be somewhere here. And then you have 8 and 26, which is going to be somewhere around here. And lastly, 10 and 30, which is going to be somewhere here. Now, as you can see, and excuse me, my line is not perfectly straight, we're going to connect the points. So let's draw a line as straight as we can. And we can actually see how this line is going to be steeper. If that line is going to be steeper, it's going to have a greater rate of change. So we're going to write that at the bottom. The line is steeper and it has a larger rate of change for function b than a. You can also mention that it is more inclined. And then it says, which function has a greater initial value? Use your graph from part b to explain. Now, we already had found the initial value for both functions, but using the graph is going to make it easier to visualize it. The initial value for function a is 16. The initial value for function b is 10. As you can see, 16 is larger than 10. So we're going to put that function a has a greater initial value. Now, every single part in this question is going to be worth 2 points, making it a total of 6 points. Now, to ensure that you're actually paying attention to the explanations and not just taking notes, I'm going to have you draw a circle. Now, I am going to tell you to draw a circle, even though I'm going to be drawing a square next to part C. Make sure that you draw the circle and don't fill it in. Just keep the circle open. It says for number 4, tell whether each of the following statements about the diagram is true or false. It says the diagram does not represent a function because 2 input values map to the same output value. Map, it just means that one input is going to go to another output. So they're saying that this is not a function because 1 goes to 5 and 3 goes to 5. And using the same example of the vending machine, you can have two different buttons that will give you the same output, like having two buttons that give you water. So this is actually false because we don't care if the inputs go to the same output. So this is false. Then the next one says the diagram represents a function because each input value maps to just one output value, which is correct. Every single input is going only to one output value. The last one says if the input and the output values were switched, the diagram will represent a function. And this is not the case because if we switch it, let's say if the arrows, instead of moving from this side to this side, it will be from this side to this side, you would actually have 5 giving you a 1 and also 5 giving you a 3. So if you switch the input and output values, this will not be a function. For number 5 says the table shows the number of students allowed in a class for a given number of teachers. Plot the ordered pairs from the table on the coordinate grid. Be sure to label and number the axis. So we need to label and make sure that we highlight that part and number. So your input values are going to be your teachers, and that's going to be your input, so that's X, and we're going to put teachers. And then the output value are going to be the students, so that's right, students. Now we need to see how much everything is changing. So the teachers is going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So everything is increasing by 1. So it will make sense that we're going to make everything increase by 1s. Now, for the students, if we pay attention to the students, we actually have 30, 60, 90, 120, and 150. As you can see, they're increasing by 30s. Now, it wouldn't make sense to start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 150. So we're actually going to go by 30s. So we're going to start with 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. And now we're going to plug in our numbers. So we have 1 and 30, and that's going to be 1 and 30, 2 and 60, and we're going to keep going with the same process until we go like this. Now, part B says, does the table represent a function? And explain. So the table does represent a function because, as you can see, you can draw a vertical line through every single one of the points and you will only touch it once. So this problem, we're going to put dots and not a straight line, because if you have a straight line right here, that means that you can actually have half a teacher and 15 students, but that's not possible. You cannot have 1.5 teachers and 45 students. Again, that's not possible. So that's why we're going to keep it as points instead of a straight line. So keep in mind again that this is going to be points, not a straight line. This problem is going to be worth 3 points, 1 point for each part. But we're going to make sure that we actually take care of the slope and y-intercept at the beginning to make everything else easier. So the first part says, Jeffrey wants to hire a catering company. Total cost includes a catering fee, which is your initial value, plus a charge for each attendee of the event, which is going to be your rate of change or your slope. The total cost for 3 catering companies are summarized below. Okay, so we know that our fee is going to be our initial value, and then also per attendee is going to be your rate of change. So what we need to do in this problem is find the slope or the rate of change, and then also find the initial value. Once you have that, everything's going to be a lot easier. So the first part, it says 50 catering fee, so that's going to be your y-intercept or your b, so that's going to be 50. And then it says 45 per person, so that's going to be your slope. So 45 per person. Now, when it comes to Ben Bistro, they actually gave us an equation. So for this one, they have t is equal to 75a. It says the t is the total, a is the number of people going, so that's actually going to give you the slope of 75, and there's no other number there. That means that this is going to be a b of 0. And lastly, we're going to be paying attention to Carla's Cooking. And now this one, they're charging you an initial value of $400. So that's going to be your first number, 400. Now we also need to find the slope. So to find the slope, I'm going to choose 2 points. I'm going to choose this point and this point. So that's going to give me 0,400. And then we're also going to get 10 and 600. And then we're going to use the slope formula. So 600 minus 400 divided by 10 minus 0 is going to give you 200 over 10, which is 20. So your slope for Carla is actually 20. So now, using that information, we're going to be comparing. It says, A, which company has the highest catering fee? So that's going to be your B. We're going to be paying attention to B and see which one is the highest. So this is 50, this is 0, this is 400. So pretty straightforward. That's going to be Carla. Now, make sure that you show the work, because this question is going to be very tricky. If there's no work, you won't get credit. All right, the next one says, which company has a highest charge per attendee? So which one is charging you the most? Now, for this one, we know that the first one is charging you 45, Ben Bistro is charging you 75, and Carla is charging you 20. So then, the one that is charging you the most is going to be Ben Bistro. And the last one, it says, which company should Jeffrey choose if he wants to pay the lowest total cost for an event with 30 people attending? So what we need to do is actually put it into perspective. If you look at the table, if you go to 30 people, he's going to spend $1,000. So for 30 people, read this one, for 30, is going to be $1,000. Now, if you're paying attention to Ben's Bistro, the only thing you need to do is multiply 75 times 30. So the total cost is going to be 75 times 30. That's going to be equal to 2,250. Okay, and the last part that we're going to do is Alonso's appetizers. So for that one, it says that we need to pay 45 per person. So it's going to be 45 times 30, and then we're going to add a $50 fee. So 45 times 30 is going to give you 1,350, plus the 50 is going to give you 1,400. Now, when you look at all those prices and look at all the work, you see that the cheapest option is going to be Carla. Even though it has the highest initial value, the rate of change is lower, which is going to make it cheaper for everyone. So we're actually going to put Carla's. Okay. Now, for this one, to make sure that you're following along and that you are taking accurate notes, I want you to name the superhero that it's in the corner. Don't draw it, just name the superhero in the corner of the paper and write it right there where the drawing is placed. Now, for this problem, we actually need to go back and remember things that you learned in 7th grade, which is the absolute value. It says consider the equation y equals absolute value of x. If you don't remember, this is the quick review. The absolute value of a number is always going to be the positive value of it, because you're actually going to be paying attention to the distance from 0. So the distance is always going to be positive. So for this problem, it says complete the table by substituting values into the equation. So the first thing that we're going to do is y is going to be equal to the absolute value of -2. And since the absolute value is always the positive version of it, our answer is going to be 2. Then for the next one is going to be y is equal to the absolute value of -1, and that's going to give us +1. Y is equal to the absolute value of 0, and that's going to be 0. And then y is going to be equal to the absolute value of 1, and again the positive is going to be 1, and so on. And now they're asking you, does the equation represent a function? Now, the only thing you need to look is at your x values and see if they repeat and they go into a different output. So -2 goes to 2, -1 goes to 1, 0 goes to 0, 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, which means that the values do not repeat. So yes, it is a function. Now the next part says, if you switch the input and the output values, does it represent a function? That means that these outputs will actually become your input, so we will actually flip it. So I'm quickly going to create a table right here so you can see it. So if we create a table, you're going to see that you're going to get 2 goes to -2, -1 goes to 1, 0 goes to 0, 1 goes to 1, and 2 goes to 2. Now, you actually can see that you're going to get a 2 goes to -2, but 2 also goes to 2, which means that this is not a function. So quickly, not a function, because the input values have more than one output. So for number 8, what you need to do is compare the slopes, because they're going to tell you to which statement compares the rate of growth. Now, for the table, you need to find the slope using the slope formula. For the equation, you actually need to do a little bit more than that. You know that the equation for a line is going to be y equals mx plus b, but the format that we have it right here is not the case. So we actually need to distribute this, and that's going to give you 105 plus 4.25a, and then you're going to get minus 21.25. Now that's still not in the form y equals mx plus b, but it's similar. Now you know that the one next to the variable is going to be your slope. So now your slope for this one is going to be 4.25. Now you need to compare the slope of the growth right here, and when you do all the work, which I'm not going to do in this case, you're going to see that the rate of change is going to be 4. So the rate of change for Donovan is actually larger than Margaret, so that's going to be B as your correct answer.